Welcome back to Game Night Bros. My name's Greg. I'm your host, and I love talking sports. Try to keep it to bite-sized increments so it's easy to consume for you. And we're going to talk today about NBA basketball, the most watchable era of basketball. Kind of want to talk about this from two standpoints, two perspectives. One, the decade or the decades that were the most watchable. And we'll also talk about programming. How did that affect it? So, what I would say is if we take a look at basketball history or just kind of watching archived footage, it's interesting, and you can see the stuff on like NBA.com or NBA channel. It's interesting when you watch the stuff from the 50s. The way they shoot the basketball and the operation of the offense, it's kind of interesting because you almost think, man, I might have been able to be a pro back then. I'm sure, the athleticism and the way the game has progressed have certainly changed a lot of that. And even back then, just having the attributes of height would have certainly played a big role in whether that's true or not. But it's just interesting in how they played the game, that it almost looks simple. And because of that, I think it would be hard to watch it. But also, back then, it wasn't even on TV. It was on like tape delay. So that also made it kind of a unique viewing experience because the games were already over before they were actually able to be consumed by the public. So I would say that the early stages of basketball were kind of not the easiest to watch. The second part of the eras that I would look at would be like in the 80s and the 90s. This is when the games actually came to live television, brought in by Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, and then later with Michael Jordan. And, when I watch those games right now, I'm like, like in the archive footage, I'm like, man, it just seems, even today, when I watch those games, I'm like, if I compare them to today's game, I still prefer it. To me, it's like you can see the offense developing. The game just seems to have a different flow to it. Whereas right now, it seems like it's more of a slowed down type of game with a lot more just passing the ball around and then shooting threes. So back in the 80s and 90s, the game was actually, I think, more watchable, certainly than the early decades, but even now than the later decades, which brings me to the later decades. I think the advent of the three-point shot, it's really kind of taken over the game. Steph Curry has brought that in with a lot of other great shooters, particularly from the European side, where they actually, the 7-footers who would normally be taken out of the game if they took a three-point shot. Now it's routine. It's actually part of their game. Which I don't think is terrible, but it's just kind of hard to watch. It's just not the same game. Although, interestingly, I would just make a side comment. I literally enjoy the three-point shot in the college game because I think it's so important for the smaller schools back before there was all the involvement with the portal and the money that the college athletes are making, where the smaller schools needed to compete. You bring in a couple three-point shooters, they were never out of a game, and the underdogs always had a chance. I think it's really valuable there. But in the pro game, it just seems like it's kind of watered it down a little bit. So I certainly think that the most watchable era was in the 80s and the 90s. And that's when, like I said, it became a live television event too, which I really enjoyed watching basketball on Sunday afternoons. I thought the Sunday afternoon games on NBC back then were just great. You know what I mean? The round ball rock afternoon, and then the programming, 1, 2, 3 games, depending on what they would have, was fantastic. Now I'm noticing that a lot of the programming is in prime time. And maybe this is an East Coast bias. Maybe I just prefer to watch the games in the afternoon. Maybe this in the West Coast, the time right now is really good for NBA basketball. But I don't know. I think the programming right now is probably not as good as it used to be either. I think that's kind of taken away from it. I feel like I need to be engaged in a basketball game, And Saturday afternoon on the weekends, I can actually kind of focus, or Sunday afternoons on the weekends, I could focus a little bit more and really kind of get engaged in a game. At the end of the day, after working, I just, I kind of want to zone out and watch a little bit more mindless stuff. And maybe that, again, that's just the world we're in now with social media. But I just find that it's probably not the greatest programming right now to have the games on in prime time. So I think all of that is playing into my thoughts that the most watchable era was in the 80s and 90s. Certainly, I'm a little bit, that was the time when I grew up watching basketball. So I might just be a little nostalgic. But the other thing is, I feel like the players had an edge to themselves back then. You know what I mean? There was, people had to prove something. It wasn't like they were just super talented and they got paid and that's all they wanted to do. Certainly they were paid well for the time, but the athletes now, I don't know how many of them have an edge. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan, they were the stars, but they weren't just the stars. They wanted to prove that they were who they were, and they wanted the championships on top of it, and their teams followed along. The last player that I could think of in the most recent time that had an edge, that wasn't just talented, but also wanted to prove it, was Kobe Bryant. And I don't think, there's as many of those type of players today as there were then. And I think that kind of makes it a little less watchable as well. I think there could be players that are just super gifted with the natural abilities and God-given abilities. And it's a great job to make a lot of money, but they may not be as passionate about the game, and they may not be as passionate about the championships as the players back in the 80s and 90s were. And I think that's also part of what makes it the most watchable era. And I think that's also why Michael Jordan is considered the greatest of all time, because he came up in that era where the programming and the marketing was probably at its best. The game, I think, was at its best. It was the most easy to watch, and you can certainly see how he was able to bring his athleticism to the game in a way that was artistic and stylistic, that was just so easy to watch and enjoyable. And on top of that, he had the passion. He had to prove something, and he never stopped trying to prove something. So that's my take. I would love to hear your take. Let me make comments below. Let me know what you think. What is the most watchable era? Am I persuaded because of the time I grew up watching basketball? Am I persuaded because of East Coast bias? Let me know. I'd love to hear. And also be sure to give us a subscribe and a like.